December 7th, 1941. Highway 62, somewhere between Carlsbad Caverns and Irwin, Pennsylvania. Little Adams gripped the steering wheel of his Buick and stared at the road ahead. The 60-year-old dentist was exhausted. He had spent the day inside one of the deepest cave systems in America, watching something that defied comprehension. At sunset, the cave had exploded with life. 1 million Mexican free-tailed bats poured out of the darkness in a living black tornado that blocked out the sky. For 20 minutes, they just kept coming. Wave after wave of wings. Adams had never seen anything like it. The power, the sheer numbers, the precision. pubmed.scbi.nlm.nih. His car radio crackled. News bulletin. Adams turned up the volume. What he heard next made his blood freeze. Japanese aircraft had just bombed Pearl Harbor. America was at war. Thousands were dead. The Pacific Fleet was burning. Adams pulled over to the side of the road. He sat there in silence, hands shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Then something clicked in his mind. Those bats. Those millions of bats. He saw them again in his imagination. But this time they were not just flying. They were carrying something. PubMed. CBI.NLM.NIH. Adams was not a soldier. He was not an engineer. He was a dentist from a small Pennsylvania town who fancied himself an inventor. Most of his ideas never worked. But this one felt different. This one felt like destiny. He grabbed a notebook from the passenger seat and started writing. Not notes, not sketches. A weapon. A weapon so insane, so utterly unprecedented that it just might end the war. YouTube? Here was the plan. Capture thousands of bats. Attach tiny incendiary bombs to each one. Load them into containers. Drop the containers from bombers over Japanese cities just before dawn. The bats would wake up. They would scatter across a 20 to 40-mile radius. They would do what bats always do. Find dark places to roost. Attics. Eaves. The spaces between walls and ceilings. Places no human could reach. Places firefighters could never access. Then the timers would tick down. Every bomb would ignite at the same moment. Thousands of fires. Tens of thousands of fires. All at once. In cities made almost entirely of wood, bamboo, and paper. FTAF+1. Adams kept writing. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, from excitement, from rage. He imagined Tokyo burning, not from explosions, not from conventional bombs that destroyed a city block at a time, from nature itself, from creatures so small, so harmless, that no one would see them coming. He wrote faster. Think of thousands of fires breaking out simultaneously over a circle of 40 miles in diameter for every bomb dropped. No fire department on Earth could stop it. No defense could prevent it. The bats would infiltrate every structure, every neighborhood, every hidden corner of every city. Japan would burn from the inside out. History? But Adams knew something else, something darker. He wrote it down in his notebook, a line that revealed the cold calculation behind the madness. Bats were, in his words, the lowest form of animal life. He believed that until now, reasons for their creation have remained unexplained. But now he understood. Now it made sense. God created bats for this exact moment, to play their part in the scheme of free human existence, to frustrate any attempt of those who dare desecrate our way of life. FTC.AF+1. Adams had just invented a weapon and a theology to justify it. He was not just building a bomb. He was fulfilling what he saw as divine purpose. Within days, Adams finished his proposal. But he did not send it through military channels. He did not contact the War Department or the Pentagon. he went straight to the top. Adams was friends with Eleanor Roosevelt. He used that connection. He wrote directly to the President of the United States. The letter was blunt, detailed, and utterly insane. It described the bat bomb in technical terms. It explained the strategy. It predicted the devastation. And it ended with a plea. Give me a chance to prove this works. Wikipedia +1, January 1942. The White House. Franklin Roosevelt sat at his desk, reading the strangest military proposal he had ever seen. His advisors waited for him to laugh, to dismiss it, to throw the letter away, and move on to real strategy. America was losing the war. The Philippines were falling. Wake Island had surrendered. Bataan was surrounded. The last thing the country needed was a dentist from Pennsylvania telling them to weaponize flying mammals. But Roosevelt did not laugh. He read the proposal twice. Then he picked up a pen and wrote a note in the margin. This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea, but is worth looking into. EFTC.AF. The President of the United States just greenlit a plan to drop fire-carrying bats on Japan. Within weeks, Adams received orders. Report to Washington immediately. Bring your team. The United States military wants to build your bat bomb. Adams was given $2 million. He was given access to military bases, research labs, and classified weapons programs. He was given a code name for the project, Project X-Ray. The name was perfect. X-rays penetrated everything. They saw through walls. They revealed what was hidden. So would the bats. Task and Purpose +1, YouTube. Adams assembled the strangest team in military history. Jack von Blücher, a mammalogist who had spent years studying bats in desert caves. Tim Holt, a Hollywood actor famous for westerns, who knew how to handle animals under pressure. A former gangster whose skills in procurement asked no questions. A hotel manager who understood logistics. None of them were soldiers. None of them had any business building a weapon. But Adams did not need soldiers. He needed people who understood bats, and he needed people crazy enough to believe this could work. Wikipedia? The first challenge was simple. Get the bats. Adams returned to Carlsbad Caverns, the place where the nightmare began. He requested permission from the National Park Service to harvest bats from federal caves. Permission granted. Teams descended into the blackness, with nets, refrigerated trucks, and ice cube trays to keep the bats hibernating. They caught thousands, then tens of thousands. Workers got bitten. Bats died in captivity. They kept catching. They needed test subjects. They needed an army. YouTube? Task and Purpose? Then came the brutal question. What species? Not all bats were created equal. Some were too small. Some could not carry weight. Some went into shock and died the moment they were handled. The team tested species after species, killing hundreds in the process. Finally, they found the perfect candidate. The Mexican free-tailed bat. The same species Adams had seen at Carlsbad. It weighed 0.3 ounces, but it could carry 0.9 ounces. 3 times its own body weight, enough for a bomb, enough to burn a building. Wikipedia? Now they needed the bomb itself. Adams originally wanted white phosphorus. It burned at 5,000 degrees. It ignited on contact with air. It could not be extinguished with water. The military said no. Too unstable. Too dangerous to handle. Too likely to kill the people building it. Then Louis Fieser joined the team. Fieser was a chemist at Harvard. Brilliant. Ruthless. Obsessed with fire. He had just invented something new. Something the world had never seen before. He called it NapalM. Wikipedia? Napalm was gasoline mixed with a chemical thickening agent. It stuck to skin. It burned through water. It melted flesh. Feeser designed a miniature version specifically for the bat bomb, the H2 napalm unit. It weighed less than an ounce. It had a spring-loaded firing pin. It had a timer that could be set for minutes or hours. It was small enough for a bat to carry. It was hot enough to burn down a city. YouTube? Adams strapped the first napalm unit to a live bat. He set the timer. He watched the bat fly around the lab, confused, terrified, carrying a bomb it did not understand. When the timer hit 0, the device ignited. The bat burned alive in midair. It fell to the ground, still flapping, still trying to escape the fire consuming its body. Adams watched it die. He made notes. He adjusted the design. He did it again. Somewhere in a military lab in New Mexico, a dentist from Pennsylvania was torturing animals and calling it patriotism. The question was not whether it was insane. The question was whether it would work. And if it did work, whether anyone would have the courage to actually use it. What happened next was unlike any weapons program in American history. Little Adams had the blessing of the president, a nearly unlimited budget, and a deadline that grew tighter by the day. Washington expected miracles. What they got instead was a cross between a scientific circus and a military disaster waiting to happen. The first task was assembling a team. Adams did not know how to organize a weapons project, but he did know odd people. His roster looked like a casting call for a war movie gone wrong. A Harvard chemist obsessed with fire, a desert bat biologist who could barely keep his hands from trembling, Hollywood animal trainers used to working with terrified monkeys, cowboys who had never set foot outside New Mexico, and logistics men used to moving circus animals, not classified military cargo. Nobody trusted the others. Arguments broke out over everything from species selection to the ethics of animal testing. But work continued, driven by the ferocious urgency of war. Expeditions for bats turned into minor military operations. Crews roamed through remote caves across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, facing dangerous climbs, angry park rangers, even the occasional child who wandered in staring at the spectacle. The team soon realized that wild bats did not take kindly to capture. Many froze to death before anyone could test them. A single scream in a holding chamber could set off a chain reaction of panic in a room packed to the rafters with flapping wings and snapping jaws. Even the experienced handlers started to wear thick gloves and masks, and rumors spread about exotic diseases and the risk of rabies outbreaks among base personnel. Transporting live bats proved itself an engineering nightmare. Scientists filled ice trays with sleeping bats and stacked them in refrigerated trucks, then raced through the desert at night, hoping to reach the laboratory before too many died from shock or suffocation. There were always casualties. Adams kept meticulous records of every death, every experiment, and every failure, convinced that a breakthrough was just around the corner. Creating the weapon itself was a series of grisly steps. The napalm charge had to be tiny, but it needed to incinerate an entire house if it landed in the right place. Miniaturization became a kind of obsession. One engineer worked through 3 nights straight, fueled by desperation and black coffee, trying to get a timer to work that would not explode in the handler's hands. Sometimes bombs went off too soon, burning bats alive before they were even launched. Sometimes inventors, standing too close, got caught in the fireball or chased by flaming bats. The smell haunted the team. More than one scientist vomited during the testing, but nobody quit. Adams drove them not with orders, but with a kind of dark enthusiasm that some on the team began to fear. For testing, the military built prototypes that looked more like coffins than bombs. Each carried up to 1,000 bats in neat racks, held in hibernation by carefully regulated cold. The bombs split open midair, releasing hundreds of barely awake bats as they fell towards the earth. On the team's first test drop near Carlsbad, things went wrong immediately. Bats woke too early, climbed out of the bomb's seams, and crawled inside the walls of the nearby hangar. Minutes later, smoke was rising. The hangar was on fire. Alongside the blaze, a general's car was reduced to a melted frame. Nobody laughed. For a stunned moment, the officers in charge realized they were witnessing a weapon that worked, just not in any way they could control. The disaster did not end the program. It escalated it. Adams's Bat Army moved west, this time under Navy oversight. The military constructed entire mock Japanese villages at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, complete with paper screens and wooden siding, designed for nothing but incineration. Testing intensified. Soldiers and scientists donned goggles and gas masks, loading bats with bombs in a race against the sun. Experiments became more organized, more brutal. Every detail was measured. How long the bats took to wake, how far they could fly, where they preferred to roost. Teams logged everything in notebooks, aware this might be the last chance to prove the project could save American lives at a terrible cost. Pressure and paranoia crept through the camp. Commanders argued over ethics, while engineers pleaded for more time and resources. Scientists worried that if too many more tests went wrong, the entire program would be shut down. Or worse, the enemy would learn America's secret. What none of them knew was that thousands of miles away, a new weapon was being developed, one with power to dwarf even their nightmares. But in the spring of 1943, Adams's ragtag unit still believed their infernal invention was the best hope for ending the war quickly, and they pushed harder, deeper, and with less restraint, in pursuit of the most bizarre weapon the American military had ever attempted. In the summer of 1943, everything the team had built was put to the ultimate test. Secrecy was absolute. Every base was locked down, every outsider forbidden. Carlsbad Army Airfield in New Mexico became a circus of scientists, soldiers, and government officials, betting careers and reputations on bats-turned-bombs. The stakes were mortal. Most of the team had grown used to handling the frantic creatures, the scalding chemical drums, the constant risk of catastrophe. But none of them were truly prepared for what live fire would mean. On a dry desert morning, the first operational test began. Bombers circled overhead. Adams' team loaded thousands of bats, asleep in their refrigerated trays, into gleaming egg-shaped bomb canisters, the deadliest Tupperware on Earth. The canisters were rolled into bomb bays under the nervous watch of officers who privately prayed none of the fuses would fail or go off early. As dawn painted the landscape, a B-25 bomber ascended, and the signal was given. The bomb released, the parachute deployed, the canister burst open at precisely 1,000 feet. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, chaos. Hundreds of bats exploded from the carrier, some still dazed, some immediately searching for shelter. Those nearest the ground veered for the base hangars and barracks. Flames erupted as the first test incendiaries activated. By sheer accident, the military had just attacked itself. One officer's car incinerated. A hangar caught fire. Scientists in lab coats ran for extinguishers, staring wide-eyed at the roaring result. The weapon, everyone now realized, worked. Too well, and on the wrong target. Commanders cursed, scientists blanched, but the program was too secret to stop. More tests followed, each one more chaotic and dangerous than the last. Bats escaped into plumbing, into the mesh of military buildings, even the desert scrub where they vanished beyond recovery. Pressured by Washington, the project moved to Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, where an entire Japanese-style village was built for destruction, a perfect, horrifying simulacrum of Tokyo. Here, the full effect was unleashed. Bombers dropped new canisters onto the fake district at sunrise. This time, incendiaries were real. Bats scattered, vanished into rafters, hidden corners, roofs. Then, right as calculated, fires ignited. In mere minutes, the wooden city was an inferno. Columns of smoke rising as every available firefighter scrambled, futile against the blaze. Observers, stony-faced, counted sights. 12 times more fires than any previous weapon had produced. No fire brigade on Earth could have stopped it. Some in attendance went silent. Others whispered that this was worse than napalm carpet bombing, that this was horror turned loose on nature itself. Meanwhile, the men running experiments saw what they had built, and some privately recoiled. The spectacle was too much even for hardened officers. Wild bats burned alive as the new incendiary units misfired. The stench of death and chemical fire clung to uniforms for days. No one wrote home about those late-night cremations or the nightmares that would follow. Yet as the smoke cleared, the unthinkable dawned. The bat bomb worked. No one denied the weapon's power. The challenge was never destroying a city, but controlling the uncontrollable, keeping the chaos leashed just long enough to unleash hell only on the enemy. Each test brought them closer to the brink of history, and to the edge of something none of them could walk back. December 1943. Dugway. Proving ground. Deep in the Utah desert. Barbed wire fences stretched for miles in every direction. Guard towers monitored the horizons. What lay inside those perimeters was so secret that even most soldiers on the base had no idea what they were protecting. The military had constructed something no one else in the world knew existed. A perfect replica of a Japanese neighborhood. The designers studied intelligence photos, captured blueprints, even interviews with refugees who had escaped occupied territories. Every detail mattered. The roofs were thatched, exactly like Osaka. The walls were bamboo and paper, identical to residential Tokyo. The streets were narrow, winding, modeled after industrial Yokohama. Even the furniture inside the buildings was arranged according to Japanese custom. It was a ghost town, built for one purpose: to burn. Little Adams stood in the center of the fake village on a freezing morning, surrounded by military brass who no longer smiled when he spoke. The pressure had become unbearable. 2 years into the project, millions spent, countless failures, and still no operational weapon. Washington was losing patience. Rumors circulated that funding would be pulled any day. Adams knew this test had to succeed. Not just work, it had to devastate. It had to prove that his insane vision could end the war. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Load 1,000 bats into a single canister. Arm each bat with a live napalm incendiary. Drop the canister from a B-24 bomber at 10,000 feet. Let the bats wake, scatter, and roost. wait for the timers to strike 0, then measure the fires. Military analysts had calculated the theoretical outcome. If the bats distributed evenly and the incendiaries functioned properly, a single bomber could ignite between 3,000 and 5,000 simultaneous fires across a 40-mile radius. No firefighting force on Earth could respond to that many blazes at once. The city would be consumed before anyone understood what was happening. But theory and reality were different beasts. Adams had watched too many tests collapse into chaos. Bats that refused to fly, timers that malfunctioned, incendiaries that detonated midair, killing the bats before they ever reached a target. He had nightmares about standing in front of a congressional committee, explaining why $2 million had been spent on a weapon that only worked in his imagination. The morning of the test, engineers loaded the bats with clinical precision. Each tiny mammal was fitted with a miniature napalm capsule weighing less than an ounce, attached by a surgical clip to the loose skin on its chest. The bats hung upside down in their trays, drugged into hibernation by cold. Some twitched. A few had already died from stress. The team worked in silence, aware that hundreds of eyes were watching from observation bunkers scattered around the perimeter. The B-24 took off at dawn. Adams stood beside a Marine general who had flown in from Washington specifically to witness the result. The general said nothing, but his presence communicated everything. This was the final exam. Pass and Project X-ray would move to operational deployment. Fail, and Adams would spend the rest of his life known as the dentist who wasted a war. The bomber circled overhead, a dark silhouette against the pale desert sky. Then the canister dropped. Parachute deployed. The bomb descended slowly, gracefully, a falling coffin packed with living weapons. At exactly 1,000 feet, the canister split open. For a few seconds, nothing visible happened. Then the swarm emerged. Bats poured into the sky like smoke from an explosion, scattering in every direction. Some dove for the ground immediately, disoriented and panicked. Others climbed higher, circling as their instincts kicked in. Most did exactly what Adams had predicted. They searched for shelter. Within minutes, hundreds of bats had disappeared into the rafters, attics, and crawl spaces of the replica Japanese buildings. Observers in the bunkers watched through binoculars, tracking movement, taking notes, waiting. The timers had been set for 30 minutes. Adams checked his watch obsessively. He chain-smoked cigarettes, hands shaking. The general beside him remained motionless, expressionless, a statue in uniform. Around them, other officers whispered predictions, placed informal bets on how many fires would actually ignite. Some were skeptical. Most expected failure. At exactly 30 minutes, the first explosion occurred. A small puff of white smoke erupted from the roof of a residential structure on the eastern edge of the village. Then another. Then 5 more almost simultaneously. Within 60 seconds, the entire village was erupting. Flames burst from windows, doorways, rooftops. The napalm burned with a chemical intensity that made the air shimmer. Buildings that had stood silent moments before were now roaring infernos, collapsing inward as their wooden frames disintegrated. Adams stared, speechless. The general reached for his radio. Officers in the observation bunkers scrambled to count the fires, but there were too many. The official count would later record over 400 distinct ignition points from a single canister drop. Analysts calculated that if 10 bombers had been used in a coordinated strike, the result would have been between 3,600 and 4,700 simultaneous fires. Tokyo's fire department had fewer than 800 trucks. The math was simple and horrifying. The city would burn faster than anyone could respond. The fake village burned for hours. Firefighting crews eventually moved in, but only to prevent the blaze from spreading beyond the test perimeter. There was no saving the structures. The napalm had done its job too well. By sunset, nothing remained but ash, twisted metal, and the skeletal frames of what had once been buildings. The smell of burning wood and chemicals hung over the desert like a curse. That night, in an officer's mess hall miles from the test site, a celebration occurred. Champagne appeared from nowhere. Adams was congratulated, slapped on the back, told he was a genius. The Marine general shook his hand and said the words Adams had waited 2 years to hear. Project X-ray is approved for operational deployment. Production begins immediately. Target date, summer of 1944. But Adams did not celebrate. He sat alone in a corner, staring at his glass, replaying the test in his mind. He kept seeing the flames, not the test flames, the real ones, the ones that would consume actual cities, actual homes, actual families. He had proven his weapon worked. He had proven it could win the war. What he could not prove, even to himself, was whether unleashing it made him a patriot or a monster. Somewhere in the New Mexico night, bats that had survived the test were being euthanized and cremated. Standard protocol. No evidence could be left behind. Adams wondered how many bats had died for his vision. Thousands? Tens of thousands? He had stopped counting months ago. The numbers did not matter anymore. All that mattered was that the weapon was real, and soon it would be used. The only question left was whether Japan would surrender before Adams's nightmare became the world's reality. Early 1944. Washington, District of Columbia. Behind closed doors in the Pentagon, a meeting was taking place that would decide the fate of Project X-ray. Little Adams was not invited. He sat in a hotel room 3 blocks away, chain-smoking, staring at the telephone, waiting for news that never came. 2 years of his life, $2 million of taxpayer money, thousands of dead bats, countless tests, and now, silence. The weapon worked. That was no longer in question. The Dugway tests had proven beyond any doubt that bat bombs could devastate a city more thoroughly than any conventional incendiary weapon in the American arsenal. Military analysts had written glowing reports. The chief of incendiary testing himself had stated in official documents that the main advantage of the units would be their placement within enemy structures, without the knowledge of the householder or fire watchers, thus allowing the fire to establish itself before being discovered. It was the perfect sabotage weapon. Invisible, unstoppable, horrifying in its efficiency. Production had been authorized. Factories were preparing to manufacture the H-2 napalm units by the tens of thousands. Bat-catching operations had expanded across the Southwest, with teams harvesting Mexican free-tailed bats from every accessible cave. The Navy had allocated bombers for the mission. Target selection had begun. Intelligence officers were mapping Tokyo, Osaka, Yokohama, and Kobe, identifying neighborhoods where wooden construction dominated, where fire would spread fastest, where bats were most likely to roost. The attack was scheduled for summer of 1944, timed to coincide with Japan's dry season, when fires would rage with maximum intensity. But then something changed. Communications from Washington became vague, evasive. Shipments of equipment were delayed. Personnel were reassigned without explanation. Adams sensed the shift, but he did not understand it. He wrote letters to his military contacts, demanding updates, insisting on meetings. Most went unanswered. The few responses he received were bureaucratic and cold. The project is under review. Further testing required. Operational deployment timeline to be determined. What Adams did not know was that his weapon had been weighed against another. In laboratories across the country, a different kind of fire was being perfected. Not napalm, not incendiaries. Something infinitely more powerful. A weapon that did not require bats or bombers or months of preparation. A weapon that could erase a city in seconds. The Manhattan Project had entered its final phase, and every available resource was being redirected toward building the atomic bomb. In March of 1944, Admiral Ernest J. King made the decision that killed Project X-ray. He did not cancel it outright. That would have been too public, too likely to generate questions. Instead, he quietly diverted funding, reassigned key personnel, and indefinitely postponed operational testing. The official explanation was that the weapon required further refinement before deployment. The truth was simpler. The atomic bomb made bat bombs obsolete before they ever left the laboratory. Adams learned the news not through official channels, but through a colleague who had heard rumors from a friend in naval intelligence. The project was dead. No formal announcement, no public acknowledgement, just silence. Adams sat in his Pennsylvania dental office, reading the letter, and felt something break inside him. He had sacrificed years of his life for this weapon. He had watched animals burn. He had designed systems to incinerate cities. And now, without ceremony or explanation, it was over. But Adams could not let it go. For the rest of his life, he would argue that bat bombs were the weapon America should have used. In interviews, in letters, in conversations with anyone who would listen, he made the same case over and over. Bat bombs would have devastated Japan with minimal loss of life. The fires would have destroyed industrial capacity, crippled morale, and forced surrender without the need for invasion or atomic annihilation. He calculated the casualties. Bat bombs would burn buildings, not people. Civilians would have time to evacuate. The weapon was surgical, precise, humane, compared to what actually happened. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay dropped little boy on Hiroshima. The city vanished in a flash of light and heat. 70,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands more would die slowly from radiation poisoning. 3 days later, Nagasaki burned under a plutonium bomb. Another 40,000 dead in seconds. Japan surrendered on August 15th. The war was over. The atomic age had begun. Adams read the reports and felt sick. He knew what those cities looked like. He had studied the architecture, the street layouts, the population densities. He had planned to burn them, not atomize them. In his mind, he saw a different history. A history where bat bombs fell at dawn, where fires spread slowly, where families had hours to flee, where surrender came not from shock and terror, but from the slow realization that resistance was futile. He believed, until the day he died, that his weapon would have saved lives. Whether he was right is a question that can never be answered. The bat bomb was never used in combat. The tests proved it worked, but the world chose a different fire. Project X-ray was declassified decades later, a footnote in the history of World War II, remembered mostly as a curiosity, a bizarre example of wartime desperation and innovation. The reports still exist in military archives. The photographs of burning Japanese villages in Utah, the technical specifications for napalm capsules, the letters from Adams to Roosevelt, all filed away, gathering dust. The bats, of course, are gone. The millions captured, tested, and killed for the project were incinerated or released back into the wild. No memorial marks their sacrifice. No monument honors their role in a weapon that was perfected but never used. They were, in Adams' own words, the lowest form of animal life, expendable tools in a war that consumed everything it touched. In 1971, Lytle Adams died in his sleep at the age of 88. He never stopped believing that bat bombs could have ended the war without the atomic horror that followed. Whether that belief was genius or delusion, patriotism or madness, depends on who you ask. What is certain is that for a brief, insane moment in American history, a dentist from Pennsylvania convinced the military to weaponize nature itself. And it worked. The weapon was real, the fires were real, the only thing that was not real was the courage to use it. Project X-Ray remains one of the strangest weapons programs in military history. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded. The bat bomb was ready. The cities were mapped. The orders were prepared. All that was missing was the will to unleash a million tiny fires across Japan and watch the empire burn from the inside out. Instead, America chose two massive fires that burned so bright they changed the world forever. History does not remember the weapon that was not used, but somewhere in the archives, in yellowed documents and grainy photographs, the bat bomb waits. A reminder that the line between genius and madness, between innovation and atrocity, is thinner than anyone wants to admit. And that sometimes the most terrifying weapons are not the ones that destroy cities in an instant, but the ones that do it slowly, invisibly, with the help of creatures that never understood the fire they carried.